Next, let's talk about how we perceive others. Research actually shows that many people are surprisingly accurate at predicting how an interaction with someone will unfold based on their initial impressions of that other person. And when we are perceiving others, we are usually relying on aspects of attribution and interpretation. So let's talk first about attribution. Attribution happens when we are trying to come up with explanations for something that is happening. So the person that we are talking to is behaving in a specific way, and we are trying to come up with these explanations for why they are behaving in that way. And we can make these attributions in two ways. We can decide that the behavior can be attributed to either internal factors or external factors. So if we decide that their behavior is attributed to internal factors, that means that we are connecting the behaviors to personal aspects such as personality traits. And if we think that a behavior has an internal attribution, we are seeing that behavior as being stable and part of their personality and therefore very difficult to change. Whereas if we attribute the behavior to external factors, if we make an external attribution, in this case, we are connecting the cause of the behavior to situational factors. And because it's based on the situation that the person is in, we see those behaviors as being much more temporary and therefore easier to change. And so, because we can make these different attributions, this can sometimes lead to errors in the attributions that we are making. The first of these errors is called the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error refers to our tendency to try to explain other people's behavior using internal attributions rather than external attributions. And along the same lines, this can also lead to the self-serving bias. And this is a perceptual error where we attribute the causes of our successes, of our own successes, to internal personal factors, while attributing our own failures to more external factors that are beyond our control. And so all of this is to say that generally speaking, we tend to judge ourselves much more favorably than we do judge other people, right? We tend to give ourselves more of the benefit of the doubt. And you can see this when we take exams in classes. So when students take exams and they get the grade back, let's say that they didn't get the grade that they anticipated getting, right? They thought that they had done decently on the exam and they get it back and it's like a D or an F and they just feel awful about it. Generally speaking, rather than attributing that failure to our failure maybe to study properly for the test or something along those lines, instead we're going to say that it's the test's fault or that it's the teacher's fault, that the questions were too hard, that they were unclear, that the teacher didn't do a good enough job teaching, those sorts of things. So we failed because of those external factors. It was nothing to do with ourselves. Whereas if we were to turn to a friend and they didn't do well on the exam, we might attribute their failure to internal factors, right? We might say that, oh, well, they didn't study hard enough, or that they were too busy at the frat party that weekend, or whatever those situations are, right? But we're looking at internal personality traits for others' failures, whereas we're looking at external factors that we can't control for our own failures. And the same thing goes for successes, right? If you were to get the test back and you were to do really well on it, you would base that success on an internal factor, right? You would say to yourself, yes, I worked so hard on this test, I studied all night for it, and all of my hard work paid off. Whereas if we turn to our friend and they did really well, whereas we didn't do as well as them, we might think to ourselves, well, they just got lucky, right? They got lucky. It was nothing to do with the fact that they stayed up and studied all night. They just got a lucky break. So we attribute their successes to external factors rather than internal ones. So the fundamental attribution error has to do with how we explain others' behaviors, whereas the self-serving bias has to do with how we explain our own behaviors. And so we can make these attributions at any time, and we can decide whether a person's behaviors are due to internal or external factors, but in a lot of cases, we're going to make those attributions in error. So we do have to be careful and check ourselves when it comes to making these attributions.